I'll call the May 26th, 2015 Committee of the Whole meeting to order. If we could let the record show that Ms. Tobias will be late. Rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'll turn the meeting over to Dr. Fieser for the agenda.
So what we're beginning with this evening is the budget. The good news is that the budget was passed by the Board of Aldermen, and it was unchanged with the exception of the reduction of $100,000, which had been recommended by the Board of Finance in February. So what you have in your packet is where we are reducing the budget by $100,000, which you can see on page 3 of your packet. $75,000 would be for the SROs. We had asked, if you remember, as part of your budget, for 2 more school resource officers. Those were not supported on the city side, which is why the Board of Finance had recommended the reduction of that amount of money. And then also, we found $25,000 in reducing the amount for school dumpsters. And I'm going to ask Mr. Riccitelli to talk about the school dumpster piece.
Sure.
I know it's an exciting topic.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dr. Fieser, Mrs. Glenn, and members of the board. Included in the 15-16 proposed budget, we earmarked $35,000 for dumpsters, and that's because the city is going to a new collection system, or they're buying new equipment that will now be front loading. It will require front loading dumpsters rather than the ones that we currently have. So all of our schools have at least 2 dumpsters. One is regular trash and one is recycling. So every school needs at least 2 dumpsters. The middle schools need 3 and the high schools need 4. And the city picks up our garbage and our recyclables on a weekly basis at no cost to the board, but they've asked us to buy the dumpsters for this coming year. We included it in our 15-16 proposal, and it's in your proposed budget. But we, from the memo that Dr. Fieser sent to you on Friday, there will be money left over at the end of the year. And one of the things that we propose to do is to buy those dumpsters out of this year's budget. So we've talked to the city about it. They have a vendor. If you approve of the changes that we're recommending, then we'll purchase those dumpsters out of the current 14-15 year budget, thus alleviating the money from the new budget.
Does that cover the full cost of the dumpsters, the $25,000?
It's an estimate at this point, but that's what we told the city we have to spend.
Okay.
So, right, it's a total of $35,000. So you'll see we're recommending $25,000 up above to be included in the $100,000 reduction. And then if you look at the very last item, we're also reducing $10,000, which would go toward the change that we're requesting for the 4 media aids. Okay. So it's a total of $35,000. That's what is earmarked in your proposed 15-16 budget.
All right, thank you. Any questions on this part? Ms. Federico?
Through you, Madam Chair. When do we actually buy the dumpsters?
We'll issue a purchase order and pay for them by July 1st. We have to do that by law.
So it's right on the cusp of either this year or next year's
Correct.
Budget. Okay.
Correct. And the city isn't sure that they will be able to have the front loaders or have the new equipment in to do it, but we'll purchase them And the manufacturer will hold them until we need them.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Sadi?
Thank you. Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Rosichelli. What happens to the existing dumpsters?
Those actually belong to the city. The city purchased them in the past. So they'll get them and
Recycle them for a lot of money, I bet.
I know, well,
They're
that's.
heavy.
I'm sure they'll be able to use them as dumpsters, but the scrap metal alone would be, is a considerable savings to the city. But I mean, it's worth it for us to purchase these new dumpsters as part of this agreement, because if we had to get a private vendor to pick up our garbage and recyclables on a weekly basis, it would be much, much more.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay.
So in addition to reducing the budget by $100,000 to honor the vote by the Board of Aldermen, we actually are requesting that one set of staff be put back in. Remember when we came forward in January with our proposed budget, our recommended budget to the board, we had included 4 full-time equivalent media aides for the elementary schools. And just to refresh people's memories, we have full-time media aides in grades 3 through 5. So in 4 of the schools, we have full-time media aides. In the K-2 schools, we've had part-time media aides. So the proposal was basically to remove the part-time and replace them with full-time media aides so that all 8 elementary schools in the fall would have full-time media aides. The board chose not to support that, and they were eliminated. But we are coming back to you to request again that those would be reinstituted. The media aides are invaluable, and Mr. St. Germain is here to speak to this, as well as Mr. Cummings. And what we're very concerned about is without having another 4 full-time, we in essence have the equivalent of, 4 full-time, 4 half-time, which amounts to no school, if we're going to be equitable, having a full-time media aide, because we would have to divide those among the 8 schools. So, so you can see that the cost is $60,000, and what's articulated here is where, again, we would find the money. Mr. Riccitelli already spoke to $10,000 coming from the school dumpsters, but we would also, we have administrators that are leaving or retiring, and there will be some savings as a result of that. We also have some building projects. We know, we always give you a list of building projects. We know we're not going to be able to, or we are going to be able to do the energy management controls projects. Do you want to speak to that? But
sure.
Why we're able to reduce $15,000?
Sure. For the same reason, there is, in the back of the budget book, we list all of the buildings and grounds projects. And there's one project that I believe is at Forum that amounts to $15,000 that we would do out of the current 14-15 school year budget. We're looking at, let me just find it here. I'm on page A21.
I don't know that everybody has their budget book with them.
Okay, no, it's one of the projects. I'm trying to find which one here. But it's a reduction of $15,000. And again, we would do that out of this year's budget. Right, and it's foreign improvements to Johnson Controls. It's earmarked for $15,000 in your budget, and we would do that project out of this year's money.
And then we would also cover the other $15,000 through savings with gasoline from the buses. again, that was just having tracked, I think, this year of the use of gasoline, and we had built in monies, obviously, in January for the budget, but now it's toward the end of the year, we really believe that we're able to save $15,000 out of next year's budget in order to cover these costs. So I guess the question would be, you may have is, for us to speak again about the value of the media aids. So I don't know, Mr. Cummings, if you want to begin, or if you would like Mr. St. Germain to talk specifically to their role.
Sure, I'll start. I'll briefly start, and ask Mr. St. Germain to go into more detail. But essentially, as we usually propose these positions, as we propose them again tonight, in fact, as we proposed them even a year ago, the idea is that as we support students and staff in the implementation of technology across the district, and particularly at our elementary schools, we have felt that in order to establish a firm beachhead for that work, we need to be able to provide teachers and students with the on-spot support they need to get going. As the board learned about recently, we've really gone a long way in the middle schools this year with the implementation of Chromebooks and the rapid facilitation of Chromebooks and the Google Docs by our staff. In our lease arrangement for next year for the 3-5 level, as it is going to be renewed, we're looking to do something similar. As we've talked about, we want to replace the existing desktop machines in the 3-5 classrooms with Chromebooks. We're hoping for a lease pricing that will give us around 7 to 8 machines per 3-5 classroom. So it's, while we call them media aids, I think it's important to note that their work would really extend throughout the building. And while this would be supportive of the media specialists in a sense, they're primarily, many of their roles, much of their time is going to be spent out in the buildings and in the computer labs. So, if you don't mind elaborating.
I'd love to elaborate.
Thank you.
Just to make another point too, is the positions that we have currently in K2, it's actually called a library aide, and those positions are part-time positions. They're paid hourly. There's no contract, and they're part of the union. It's 4 hours with, I think, maximum 20 hours a week for that position. The 3 through 12 media aides, those are unionized positions. They're a whole different contract. You know, so the set of skills you need to have to be a 3 through 12 media aide are very different than a K2 is. So if we maintain the K2, the main thrust of the position is actually library clerk. And so they can't go out and fix the computers. It's not part of the scope of their job. It also would encroach on the job of the 3 through 12 media aides. So we have to be careful what we would have them do. So dividing up two very different positions, so it's not like we're reallocating people who can do the same job, which is why we really would need to replace the K2 media or library aides with media aid positions. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to get into some of the things, I mean, I mentioned very briefly the kind of idea that they'll support people, but do you want to speak more specifically about some of the tasks?
Yeah, currently the 3 through 12 media aides, they support a lot of the classroom teaching and technology. They're the first line of defense. I'm going to move over a little bit. It's a strange echo over here. So they're the first line of, I guess I would say, triage for any kind of technical problems that the teacher may be having. So the library will get called, and the media aide they'd be supporting the media specialist in technology lessons, but if they're called out, the media specialist is there to continue the lesson, while the media aide would go to the classroom and fix things such as smartboard issues, document camera issues, issues with students being able to log on to technology in the classrooms. With the addition of Chromebooks in the classrooms, in 3-5 classrooms, this support, I think, would be very necessary. They also helped with the implementation of our typing program this year. So they supported the media specialist in the introductory lesson, which was given to all grade 3 through 5 students. And it really helps to monitor where students were in their progress. And they can continue to support classroom teachers in helping implement that as it's being assigned for homework. So it's triage, technical support, technical assistance, as well as supporting the library, because a lot of our technology lessons this coming year with Google Apps for Education running through K through 5 schools, they will be with the media specialist and implementing these lessons, and then they can then support the use of it in the classrooms.
Questions?
I have a question.
Federico?
Through you, Madam Chair, to administration, does the $60,000 represent the cost of adding 4 full-time media aides, or is it the net cost?
It's the net cost.
Okay.
It actually would be $120,000. But if we pull off the 4 part-time and then replace them with 4 full-time, the net cost is $60,000.
Okay, so the intention is not to keep the
No.
part-time?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And then a second question, if I may. Who do the media aides report to in terms of structure? Are they under your organization?
They are.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. DeRosa, did you have a question?
Yes, through you to anybody in the administration. Considering I'm going to be consistent on my vote, the reasons why I did not want the media aides in there, I'm going to continue to do that. What my surprise is, and my concern is that when I look at the opportunity to pay for and to cover these $60,000, which is the cost of bringing these 4 media aides back, whether the media aides or their custodians or whatever. I mean, you're asked to reduce $60,000 at the budget. We saw that as a line item. It's a vote. We said no, and it was, I think, the second time it happened. Now this is an opportunity to bring them back, which personally I don't have a problem with. What the questions I want to ask, and I'm going to first of all direct it to Mr. Riccitelli. When we talk about gasoline and buses, and we find $15,000 reduction. When did you know that you'd have a $15,000 reduced need for gasoline? Did that all of a sudden come up last week or was it last month or last year? And the reason why I ask that is when you're looking at forecasting projections or dollars from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and I've heard comments made quite often where it's almost daily you look at the numbers. Correct. So to me, I would interpret this as all of a sudden we're finding $15,000. And my question is, if it's all of a sudden we found $15,000 because the administration is put in a situation they wanted something they couldn't have it, now they can find a reason to get it back. What else could be found in the budget? So that's my first question to you on the justification of finding that $15,000. How did you come about finding that money?
As I've said to you many times before, we track the budget on a daily, weekly, and we report to you on a quarterly basis. And we've reported to you each quarter what we believe at that snapshot in time will be to the end of the year. And when I came to you at the last quarter, the quarter's report, I reported to you that we will have savings at the end of the year. We will have a surplus in many of the accounts. There will be some accounts that we will have to cover, and we would come to you, as we always do, each June and July to make those budgetary transfers. Dr. Fieser sent home a memo, or not sent home, I'm sorry, sent a memo in the board update on Friday, as I do and my predecessor did before. We identify those projects that we believe can be done depending on the final amount of money that we have at the end of the year. And so the $15,000, as you know, we have a new system of how we purchase our diesel fuel and how we pay for our gasoline. That's a new that's a new system that we just put into place this past September. So when this budget was passed the previous May, we didn't know that we had that in place. We also didn't know at that time what the locked-in price would be with the city, because it only goes out to bid once a year, and that's in November. And so when the dollars were locked in, and now that we have this new system in place, we believe that we will have generated savings. So was it found last week? No. We knew that we were running a surplus in the gasoline account.
So it would probably be safe to say come November, December, we'll find another possibility of more savings.
It all depends on what the locked-in price will be this year. As I said, the city
If
goes out to bid
it's
once a
same or
year.
reduced, then there's presumably.
Well, you have to remember that gasoline prices and diesel prices are back on their way up now. And so come November, we could have a price that's much higher than the current one we're paying. And then we would be, I still think we'd be fine, but it's unpredictable. And when you're setting a budget in May for something that you won't have a locked-in price until November, you take your best guess based upon the information that you have at the time. And that's what we've done.
Okay, and you've already answered the question about the school dumpsters. The building projects, reducing energy management control projects. Do you know which ones were earmarked not to be done?
Yes, I thought I answered that. It's on page A21 of your appendix in the budget.
I don't know, sorry.
And it's $15,000 that is repair of a Johnson Controls project, the third from the bottom, on the buildings and grounds projects, appendix I. It's improvements to Johnson Controls at Flooring. It's $15,000, and it's not that that project won't be done. It will be done out of this year's end-of-year savings.
It's on A21,
I was just looking at it.
third from the bottom. What does it say? What's it called?
It's called
Third from the
Flooring.
bottom, actually from the top set of,
Right, building projects, foreign, improvements to Johnson Controls for a cost of $15,000.
I don't think I'm looking at appendix I.
so this is A21 appendix, page A21.
A21. Yep,
And so you're looking at the top set of numbers here, and
yep,
it's the third one.
Our book looks different.
sorry.
Just from seeing the,
Yeah.
this
The
book.
pro-
You're looking at the,
Oh,
you're
you're looking at
looking at the
14,
14,
you're looking
15
at
That's
budget.
the 14, 15
That's the
book,
old
that's what.
Yeah, you want to look at the 15-16.
Oh,
This is,
Okay,
you want to see it?
yeah. Just for giggles, I brought the question up on as well.
Oh,
Give an answer. This one.
So
Okay,
the
I got it.
first set,
Yeah,
third
yeah.
from the bottom, on that top set.
And the last question is, thank you for that. Administrators reduction, do you have, do you know what schools these were affecting?
So for example, Mr. Finn is retiring after 46 years. He's one of our assistant principals. We know that in hiring, well, we've already hired the person coming in. They're brand new to administration, so there's going to be savings there. We know that Mrs. Kelleher is going to be leaving.
You're
She's
leaving?
retiring.
Come on.
September 1st.
So we just knew that there was going to be some savings just simply out of it from administrations. And again, $20,000, that's where we came up with it.
Okay. Okay, that's my question.
Just as a follow-up to Mr. DeRosa's question about the gas, if I'm not mistaken, in our budget from 2014-15 to 2015-16, we'd actually already reduced $20,000. So
We
you
did.
did make some adjustments, anticipating that we would be spending less, already made some adjustments.
We did, but when we put this budget together, we were in October and November putting the budget together. We hadn't locked in with the new price until November.
Uh-huh,
So
understood, okay. Other questions, Mr. Sadi?
Thank you. Madam Chair, through you to administration, I have two questions. The first one is that, and I don't know if I heard this, but where are we not having these for full-time aides? Which schools are they not in?
Right now, they're the 4 K2 schools. So Orange Avenue, Live Oaks, Kennedy, and Matheson right now have part-time.
And the next question is, I'm assuming you've been through the process of finding out which teachers belong in which schools and how that's working. Is that going to affect what has already been in place? So I'm assuming you figured out that you needed so many teachers up to grade 5, and some of them might have been certified at different levels. forever. Is that going to change what you've done up at this point if we now approve this?
Will the hiring full-time media aides have any bearing on the staffing, the teacher
Right.
staffing?
You've already done already that up to this
No,
point.
no, it would not.
No,
Absolutely not.
So that they already got a room if they need one, and they have a place, so it's just a matter of them becoming full-time?
Right, their room is the library media
They work out
center.
at the library media center, they
No
don't
separate
take a
room?
lot of space.
So they go from room to room, they go
They
out
do.
into the school?
They do, they work in the computer labs, they help administer testing. They
Thank you.
teach everywhere.
Other questions? So my only comment is that this is the second year that administration has requested this particular, oh, no, I did have a question, I'm sorry. K2, will we be doing keyboard instruction in K2?
With K2, it's not really recommended for research. You could, there have been some recommendations saying that you could begin it in second grade. But mainly what we try to do with kindergarten through second grade is actually just get them familiar with the keyboard. It's not touch typing. Their hands aren't big enough until they're about in third grade to do
And this
touch
is
typing.
something that these people would be helping
They
with?
would definitely facilitate that.
This is a position that administration has asked for now 2 years in a row. 2 years in a row, the board has chosen to eliminate the request from the budget. And then both years after the fact, we had people coming back saying, last year it was a board member saying he had spoken with staff that was concerned that there wasn't enough support in this regard. Keyboarding was mentioned. This year, again, we had teachers and parents. I think Mrs. Burney might have been one who commented that there's a concern that there's not enough keyboarding or support for the technology. So, you know, in my mind, this is now twice this has happened, that we've reduced, they've asked for it, we've reduced it, and then after the fact, people have come back and said, we really need this. So I'm inclined to support this at this time, personally, because of that. Yes, Mr. Whiskeyman.
Just to help me understand and clarify the consequences of the decision, what are the implications of not doing this? Suppose we just say no and you deal with the staff that you have. What would you have to do to provide what support you can, given the 4 regular medias and 4 clerk aides?
I've been trying to put together various scenarios to see how that would work. One of the only solutions I could think of would be to take the 4 full-time media aides and have them travel for part of the week. But there's no equitable way to provide the technical expertise of those people. So if the school that had them as their home base would be at an advantage of those schools.
So half day here, half day there, or 2 days here, 2 days there?
Well, the media aid clerk type position is a 4-hour per day, so they would be in their schools for 4 hours a day. So I think I would put the 3-5 people, I would have them stay in their school for 4 hours, and then the remaining few hours of their day, they'd go to another school.
So there would be travel cost and travel time taken out of the day,
Right.
even though it's maybe, in some cases, only a mile down the road. It's still time to get to your car, get there, and what have you.
It's also a loss of instructional time, though, for teachers. So if a teacher's having trouble with a piece of equipment, and you call the media center and get somebody to help them right away,
But if the person's not there,
rather than wait for them to come in the afternoon.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Exactly.
Okay. Just wanted to try to understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Sager.
Madam Chair, through you to administration, and it is not just on this piece, but if we see on page 9, is that going to be part of the request for line items? This is Mr. Cummings' breakdown of how,
Enrollment and staffing changes. It's not affected, this does not have anything to do with that.
No, this is just, the staffing is provided overall as tied to the budget. We always provide the staffing up to this point, and actually Mr. Cummings was going to speak to that. It has no bearing on your this issue with the media.
thank you.
Other questions?
I have one more
Yes,
question.
Mr. DeRosa.
Mr. Jim, through you, through Commissioner St. Germain. Right now, when we go from K through 2, maybe K through 5, in all 8 facilities at elementary, and if we were not to do this, there would only be 4 of the buildings that would have full-time mediated.
Correct, before we have
Just 4 would have part-time.
Other questions? Is there anything else to present with this?
Do you want to speak to the,
Speak to the staffing.
Should we, is that part of this decision, or should we
no, it's not part of
vote
the
on
decision,
this?
it's part of the overall bottom line of the budget.
Okay, so we probably should make a decision, vote on this first.
Sure.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. DeGrego.
before we vote, can I request a 5-minute recess?
Certainly you may.
Thank you.
Yes. Does anybody object? Okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
All set?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we'll reconvene at 7:42. Are there further questions or comments about this topic before we have a motion? Mr. Shaddy?
Thank you. Madam Chair, I make a motion the Milford Board of Education approves the budget for 2015-2016. Amount of $91,010,638 with line item adjustments as recommended by administration found on page 3 of our packet for tonight.
Is there a second for the motion?
I'll second.
Is there further discussion?
One last
Yes.
question in reference to the media aids. The full-timers that are currently employed, what percentage of they're on a 7 or 8 hour day?
Not certain.
Not certain, okay. Of that, my question was basically to that 7 or 8 hours, whatever it is, 6, 7, 8 hours, whatever it may be. What percentage of that is are they actually active in working with classrooms, fixing problems all day long? How much downtime do they have versus that right there? I mean, is it, 3-4 hours where they're, okay, doing whatever they're doing as media aides in their office or whatever, and then they go out on a call, that on-call type of scenario is what percentage of their day?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you at this point, and it's going to be a little different next year with the addition of Chromebooks in the classrooms and 3-5 classes. It's going to look very different than it would this year. I tried, one of the things that we would do is to track it would be, they would need to put in help desk tickets, and even if it's one they're going to fix, they'd put the ticket in and then they would fix the problem and then report that they repaired it. So we really have some good data next year. We don't have great data on that this year.
They also, though, if they're not in the classroom, they're in the library media centers where they do other kinds of work, which you might want to...
downtime, but I think you were asking just how much are they...
How much are they going out versus technology versus what they're normal, the other stuff that they do, the percentage of their day.
Yeah, and it's hard because in the media center, they're also supporting technology then and there.
Right.
They are working with students on login issues. They're helping assist the media specialist in technology lessons. So when something new is being introduced, they're running around as much as the media specialist is in supporting that instruction. I get better data, for the middle and high schools. That's pretty much all they do. The job is very different. They're running carts from classroom to classroom. They're repairing laptops, they're fixing laptops, helping students with accounts. When I go to the media centers, I rarely see the media aides in the high school and middle schools.
Right. But it's at the K-5 that we're looking at right now for those, the full-time.
Other questions?
And that's kind of where, right, okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, Ms. Federico?
Just to clarify, did you say if there's Chromebooks in the K-5 classrooms, that perhaps a media aids day in an elementary school might start to look more like a media aid in the middle school and high school, where more of it is
Yeah.
on-call type work?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
If I can, just to give you some example, I'm using the enrollment grid at Mathewson, for example, right now, which currently does not have a media aid, instead has the library media aid that Mr. St. Germain spoke of earlier. With a projection of 10 classrooms in grades 3 through 5, that's potentially 70 to 80 more Chromebooks just alone, as well as the additional second lab going to be added to the infrastructure of that building, and that's going to be, to varying degrees added across all 8 buildings, as well as our effort to, to be that many more classrooms with smart boards and so on. So the technology, as the board has supported it, continues to infuse through the system.
Okay, thank you.
So if you could help me just clarify one further thing for me. What I'm hearing, the one piece of new information I heard tonight was that the K-2 schools have a part-time library aide,
Correct.
which is a totally different job classification
Absolutely.
than the media aide. And my understanding from what you said was that they really can't do the same things that a media aide does.
Correct, because if I were to give them the same responsibilities, then they would ask to join the union and.
And is there an overlap of what they do? Or, I mean, because it seems to me that really what it boils down to is that if we only have 4 media aides, they're going to be half-time at all 8 schools rather than even three-quarter time, because those 4 library assistants are can't do the same function.
Correct. So maybe it's a matter of cutting their jobs in half and having them support the school half-time during different parts of the day. It's a lot of people running between schools.
All right. Other questions? Ready to vote on this? Yep. Okay, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No.
Roll call, please.
Claire Casey,
Yes.
Michael DeGrego,
No.
John DeRosa,
No.
Suzanne Tobias is absent. Jennifer Federico,
Yes.
Heidi Goldorkin,
Yes.
Anthony Pacelli,
No.
Robert Sadi,
Yes.
Earl Whiskeyman,
Yes.
Susan Glenn.
Yes.
6-3.
6-3, motion passes. Okay. Dr. Fieser? Next part of this.
We also wanted to just give you a sense of the staffing. Mr. Sadi asked about the staffing, has it been finalized? And we went through the major pieces last week. As I indicated to you on Friday when I sent you the update, there were 67 teachers who were in the displaced persons pool and had to choose by seniority a new position, grade level and or building. Well, actually grade level, which then they may not have been able to choose the building. And then there were also some involuntary transfers, et cetera. But so we're for the most part staffed at every one of the elementary schools, and we wanted to give you an idea of what does it look like in as far as the number of sections. Mr. Cummings can speak to that, and also I'll really highlight the fact that we have some areas of potential concern. So if you take a look at his memo and then also the spreadsheet that he gave you, that's what he will be addressing.
Thank you, Dr. Fieser, and good evening, everyone. If you look on page 9, on the memo itself, there's a correction just under the first line, under recommended budget FTE action. Underneath that heading, the first sentence says the board adopted budget calls for a reduction of 13.4 teacher positions. That should say 18.4, which are enumerated below. So we put forward the budget, and there's been no changes essentially there's no changes at all in the FTE, the teacher FTE, and the budget as initially proposed till today, as the budget you adopted. Essentially, we had called for, the budget had called for a reduction of 18.4 positions. and an increase of 19.5. And on the memo, I've looked to enumerate where the reduction of 18.4 came from and where the additional 19.5 staff are being allocated. As we've talked about, the 18.4 consists of 11 staffing positions at the middle school level, 1.4 positions in middle school humanities, a 1.0 position moved to Title I grant, and 5.0 special ed positions. Initially, my projection had, I initially hoped for 2.4 FTE reductions at the middle school and humanities area. That was what our initial scheduling iterations in the fall looked like as we prepared the budget. But as we went forward with that, we were not able to achieve that number. And so, in keeping true to the initial request, I'm saying that we can put 1.0 positions on the Title I grant, effectively keeping our general funds budget at the reduction of 18.4 positions. That will require a reallocation of monies within the grant, but I believe it's certainly sustainable within the grant. The additional staffing positions, we initially called for 16 elementary teachers, 3.0 specialists, and 0.5 strings. Again, as we've talked about, and I'll talk about it in a second as we look at the actual enrollment grid, but we certainly talked about in January, we were going off of, as we developed the staffing, of some initial projections from Malone and Broom, waiting really for a final answer, which as you know, well know, did not come until April, but really trying to work off what their initial numbers called for in additional teaching positions. At this point, and I'll talk about the actual classroom positions more in a second, but let me talk specifically to the specialists. We do see the need for 0.5 strings teachers. Rather than 3.0 increase in specialists at the elementary level, we believe an increase of 4.5 is necessary. As I began to develop the specialist grid, what became really apparent as I did so across the 8 schools is that the ability to move staff as we currently have done and divide staff between 2 and sometimes 3 buildings became more difficult under the new projections. By difficult, I mean it would require a teacher to travel for more than 1 or 2 periods. And what began to happen is certain elementary schools wound up with 2 or 3 PE teachers at various times, being mindful of the overlap, which becomes increasingly difficult to schedule and so tightens the FTE around the specialists that there's no room for potential growth. And as I'll talk about in a second, I think it's mindful to have some room for potential growth at the elementary level right now, which by having this amount of elementary specialists will allow for some additional classrooms to be absorbed into the teachers' teaching loads at their schools. As we looked at the 1.0, as we looked at the staff, the reading interventionists across the district, and as we reallocated the students across the 8 schools, Ms. Sinnell, our ELA supervisor, became concerned because there was a number of students there were a couple of school locations of high needs for reading support that we couldn't support with the current reading interventionist level. So we looked at the idea of taking one of the appropriated FTE and assigning it specifically to reading interventionists. And reading interventionists, again, are folks who work with students who are struggling to read at grade level. And that position will be allocated between 2 of our elementary buildings. So that's a change in the reading. And then the final is the 0.5, which again, I think even as we do this, I'm working to be mindful of the fact that there are enrollment issues that we have to just keep in our thoughts as we move forward through the summer. Before you look at the grid, or as you look at the grid, I just want to point out something I say every year. I'm going to repeat it again this year. But even this year, more than any other year, it takes on special significance. Coming forward to you tonight with an enrollment is a moment in time. It's this moment in time. As we go forward, and we staff the schools, as Dr. Fieser spoke about, we're going to continue to watch this enrollment throughout the summer. And as the board is well aware, we make staffing adjustments in June, July, and August, and potentially even in September as we get closer, depending on what our summer enrollment numbers pick up. And in particular, as you look at the grid, I am concerned because our kindergarten numbers, for example, are below the Malone and McBroom expectations. At every other grade level, Malone and McBroom is within 2 or 3 above or below what they predicted back on their initial findings through the course of the winter, from November through essentially April. But right now, the kindergarten number is low. Even after running a day and a half of additional kindergarten registration last week, which numbers are reflected in this grid, we're still below what is expected. To give you one example, Live Oaks, it's showing 31 students right now, but initial projection was 41 students. That would be the difference between a second, 2 sections and 3 sections. And every area where I've highlighted in red is an area of concern. So while we're asking for, for elementary FTE, we're currently placing 7 teachers over what we have in 14-15. So in 14-15, we have 130 K-5 teachers. For 15-16, we've already placed 137. And we're asking for an additional 6 as safeguard against potential further classroom placements. And every area I've highlighted in red, which is more than 6 areas, we have concern. If you look at a school like Mathewson, their K1 and 2 all potentially present a problem for us because they're all right on the edge of that number 20 that the board has adopted for a class size, top class size height in K2. If you look at a school such as Calf Penn in grade 3, or 5th grade at Pumpkin Delight, 4th grade at Live Oaks. Those are schools that are potentially on the brink of going over the 25 number in 3, 4, 5, which is a number the board has tried to avoid in past years, for many, many years. So these are the areas that we identify as potentially liable to change and move upwards. And so the 6 additional positions right now is a safeguard. In any other year, I'd feel much more confident about the numbers because we have a familiarity with them. But this year being what it is, and this year being new, and with enrollment continuing, particularly again at the elementary level, at the K level, I think 6 is a safeguard against additional staffing needs that we may encounter. I've already had the question from people in the school community. What if you need 7? What if you need 8? And I think the board knows from past discussions what we've had to do in the past when that has happened. If we needed staffing, Dr. Fieser would come forward in August or September with a request for additional staffing, and there would be an offer of budget savings in other accounts to pay for that staff. It certainly has happened before. It will certainly happen again. But I believe 6 is a safeguard against potential changes this year. Any questions?
Good question.
Yes, Mr. DeRosa?
So the 6 are going to be actively doing something in the school system?
I don't. No, we would place 6 when we had room for 6.
They're unassigned, right?
We haven't hired anybody. We haven't hired anybody.
So the basically positions in limbo.
Right. We haven't hired anybody. We've posted right now anticipated elementary positions. We do know that there'll be changes in the existing 137 staff, for example. We have a reading interventionist position, 2 of them that are open. We have a literacy coach position that are open. If those were hired by current existing elementary classroom teachers, they create openings. So we certainly need to be moving forward on the hiring process at elementary teachers, because without any changes, there will be openings. But further, we have to be anticipating that we'll be adding additional sections over the course of the summer, because most summers we do.
So, and I was looking for the HR report. Obviously, I know we didn't get one in this packet, but I normally list the open positions, how long has been posted. How are we doing on that, on that, filling those open positions that have been open for a while?
Teaching position?
Yeah.
We're really in a process now of moving towards starting to interview. We have at the middle school and at the high school level, we have math and ELA positions that are open. I believe we have a biology position at Foreign, or a multi-science certification position at Foreign. We don't have a lot of hiring so far this year at the middle school and high school level at all.
So what about the language arts? I know Spanish.
Oh, at world language?
Yeah.
We have two Spanish, we have one Spanish opening at the high school.
Yeah, wasn't it two?
We're going to fill one with a transfer.
Oh. Okay.
My recollection is that you, in the past, you have actually done similar where you've had like a reserve of only a couple though, not 6, but
Not six.
it's not a practice that we haven't employed before as a school district.
Absolutely not. We try to do this if we've got it in order to avoid that, and if the funds are not used, we haven't used them. But I think this year, given that, I've never, in the 7 years, I guess, of doing this, I think it's 7 years now of doing this type of enrollment projection in May, I've never seen 7 or 9 areas that I'm concerned about. And given the newness this year, I think it just behooves us to be safe.
So, if I may ask one.
Yeah.
So how far are we off enrollment from this time last year?
From this time last year, I don't know offhand, Mr. Rose. I don't have my my 14, 15 with me.
I'm just trying to figure out, you know, has us going through this process as a district caused people to think or make other decisions or whatever? I mean, or is this normal, you know, life according to the projections of M&M? I can't remember, call them M&M.
At the elementary level, I'd say that this is relatively normal. What's different is the distribution, and what strikes me right now, considering that they, as I said, they were within 2 or 3 kids, no more than 5 kids at any above or below at the other levels, that they're below their projection. Their projection for kindergarten, I don't even remember the exact figure, but it was more close to what they see in first grade than what you see right now in kindergarten.
They had projected, well, actually, they hadn't projected, this is really the existing numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah, from October.
You do see an enrollment decline at the middle school level. As we've talked about, that decline that we've experienced over the years at the elementary is starting to hit the middle. This is probably the last year, 15, 16 is the last year for large numbers, particularly in Harborside somewhat. But you'll see that 6, 7, and 8 number total drop consistently. And in another 2 years, you'll start to see its impact on the high school.
So, if I can just continue to engage comment, going into that, is it more at the 6th grade that the dropping is happening, 7th, is it 8th? Is it equally amongst those 3 grades, or is there any one particular grade that kids are just
No, there's a bubble. If you look, there's a bubble in 7th, I think it's 7th, that's higher than either the 8th grade that precedes it, or that comes after it, or the 6th grade. Yes, that precedes it, or the 6th grade. The 7th grade projected for next year is slightly higher than the grades around it. But if you just take, go out 3 years and take the current 4, 5, 6 numbers, or I'm sorry, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers, and project those into 6, 7, and 8, you can start to see what will happen over the time of the 3 middle schools. We have, as the board knows, the 1 grade where you'll see an enrollment decline is in 8 to 9. And, you know, that's really the influence of flat cap in the private schools as students leave. That's where you probably see the greatest single drop off.
And I'm just trying to put, is that what, and I don't think we have the answer, but is that what is causing the 5th, 6th, and 6th and 3rd drop also?
No, my sense is that what's causing that decline is the factors that Malone and Brew described when they talked about the overall enrollment decline.
Okay.
You asked about the numbers, so for example, just K-5 in October at the elementary level where it was 2649, and what you can see on Mr. Cummings' chart here is that right at this moment we're at 2582. So about a little under 70, about 65 kids difference. If you add in the pre-K, however, in October with the pre-K, we were at 2842. Well, it's about the same, and then and right now we're at 2775. So we knew there was going to be a decline, but again, the kindergarten is lower than what was projected by Malone and Broom, so we don't know if there's going to be more kids. Last week we registered, what, 35 additional kindergarten kids came in.
It was over 55 almost.
Was it 55 in over 2 days last week? Right. So, again, we just don't know.
Am I correct that there are certain school districts where there tends to be more enrollment, kindergarten enrollment over the summer than others?
That's correct. You'll see a greater enrollment in the areas that have a greater number of rental units. So Hunger Delight will be a school this year to watch. Live Oaks is a school to watch. Kennedy somewhat, and even the area somewhat, Captain may be influenced a little bit now because it encompasses some of downtown and some rentals, although most of the rentals downtown are not child conducive.
Meadowside?
Yes. Meadowside. Meadowside, though, is interesting. Meadowside changes, but for all those apartments have families, so it's almost like a zero sum.
Oh, okay. Other questions? Mr. Whiskeyman?
If by some chance you actually use less than 6, that would put us under the budgeted FTE, and I presume that would ultimately result in a surplus in the salary account because you don't have that position filled. Is that a correct?
That's how it would play out, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
We said during our budget process that if that is the case, then we would expect that money would be put aside to be returned to the city at the end of the year, unless we didn't have some kind of major emergency throughout the year, during the year. Mrs. Federico?
I have a few questions through you, Madam Chair, to administration. First, I just want to get some clarity on the 67 teachers displaced. So, and that's out of 137.
130.
130,
Yes.
okay. Does that count teachers who may have had seniority at a school and chose to go somewhere else, or is that another group?
The 67 is the total number of teachers who, as Dr. Fitzer said, are either moving a grade, a building, or both.
Okay.
It's not all elementary teachers, because there was a number of middle school teachers who had elementary certification who, because of the FTE drop at the middle school, were displaced as well. And it also included 2 teachers who had dual certification in special ed and a K-6 certification who were impacted by the reduction in special ed. So there's quite a number of rivers flew into this ocean.
Okay.
You know, but the good news of this is that despite all that, no single person has lost a position in the district this year. So it was a total number of 67 teachers who either were the least senior people in their grade, or through our contractual process, volunteered to go in the place of other teachers who would have been the least senior in their grade.
Okay.
And then the process is done strictly in seniority order.
Okay, so a teacher with higher seniority that volunteered to move would be included in this pool?
Yes.
But have more seniority to say where they wanted to go? Okay. Another question on the chart here that we're looking at, does this include any students that chose grandfathering?
It does.
It's updated for that,
Yeah.
okay. When I was reading through the numbers on the line for average class size by grade, it looks like there might be a mistake in the formula between grades 1 through 5. Kindergarten looks correct, but then grade 1 Kindergarten is 18.2.
Yeah, it looks like good, you're right.
Grade 1 is 35.8.
Yeah, that's not correct.
Okay. So if we could just get that updated at some point, that would be helpful. So another one of my questions is regarding, you said you were more concerned about this year. Do you have 19.5s and 23.5s every year? Or you feel like you have more of them
I
this
think
year?
this year we have more. Remember, this goes back to the conversation that Dr. Fieser had as part of the reconfiguration process. You know, for the past 5 years, we've only had 4 at every grade level. So, well, 4 schools with every grade level. And you had 7 or, well, even at one point, 8 sections of a grade, 7 sections of a grade. So when kids moved into that grade, there were more places where they could go. So if you had 23.5 in, you know, Kennedy second grade this past year, and you had 7 of those grades, essentially there was, you know, 1.5 sections, 1.5 spaces for times 7. There's 10 places where kids could wind up. Now, there might be 3.
Okay, so there was more room for error.
Right.
Okay.
Or for absorption.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So that number that we talked about with the 13, which is 7 placed and 6 in reserve, will we keep receiving updates on that number?
We will.
And by
It's just
September, we'll
constant
have the
work.
final?
Sure.
October.
October?
October would be the final
Okay.
enrollment.
October is the final enrollment for census purposes, but it's one of those things that will be on every board agenda from now on.
Right.
Okay. So between the 7 positions and the 6 positions, are the 6 all new hires and the 7 all existing hires? Or how does that relate to the open positions that were?
Any open positions from now on will be additional hires for the district.
Okay.
So that includes not only the 6, but I'll go back to the special ed example for a minute. As I said, there were 2 special ed teachers who were certified, cross-certified with K-6, and as part of the special ed reduction, they were moved into an elementary position. If between now and September, a special ed teacher someplace else in the district resigns, or becomes a reading specialist, that special ed teacher that was initially displaced as of last week has the right to go back into a special ed position, which would create an opening. And that position would be a new hire too, even though it's an existing position.
I think that's the distinction. You have 7 existing positions that could be freed up if somebody moves to a different position.
Okay.
So we would hire new for that existing position, which differs from the 6 unassigned positions, which would be newly created if, for example, 5 more kids moved into Matheson's kindergarten, for example. We would create a new section, and then we would be hiring new, but that's a new position.
Okay, and that would be one of the 6?
That would be one of the 6.
Okay.
Correct.
And the 7 are all filled with existing people?
Correct.
Okay. And the 6 do not have any people assigned to them?
Correct.
Today? Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
I have a question regarding preschool. Do we feel we're set with that? I know that we've had reports in the past that sometimes there is a need because kids coming in that we need to open a new section of preschool. Would that play into this at all? Are we all set with preschool?
Right now, we project to be all set with preschool.
So far, we're good. All right. Any other questions on this? Okay. All right, thank you for all the information. There's a lot to digest there.
The next item on the agenda is the concussion policy. This is brought before you for a first reading. And just to give you a context, if you remember, we came to you in February with a revised policy on concussion. And then we were coming back to you in March with a second reading of it, only to have received in that time the new State Board of Education guidelines on concussion management. So CABE actually indicated that they were going to be revising the policies tied to concussion, but they would not be coming out until April. So when we met with you in February, I believe it was, February and March, we said to you, could we delay this and then come back to you after we received CAPE's policy? And then we, looked at it because they were going to incorporate the changes that came about from the State Board of Education's guidelines, et cetera. So we did receive the revised policy, and of course we had the state guidelines. We went through the policy, and quite frankly, the policy that you have before you, as well as the administrative regulations, almost mirror what CABE had sent to us. And then when we completed, revising this, we then shared it with Dr. Carlson, and I don't know if the board has met Dr. Andrew Carlson. He is our new medical advisor, school medical advisor, and we're thrilled to have him. And so we sent it to Dr. Carlson. He had looked at the old policy and had raised some serious questions about not so much what was in the policy, I think more what was maybe not in the policy. So for example, when a student returns to school, the kind of the step-up process for kids to, moving both academically as well as, back into playing sports, et cetera. In this new policy, the State Board of Education guidelines are very specific in as far as kids coming back into the school, and we even, Dr. Carlson even suggested that we add a little bit of language to underscore it even further. I'm just trying to remember where that piece of language was. But it again spoke about students coming back into the school system. So for example, on page 17, I believe it was, on number 2 and 3 there, with respect to return to play after concussions or head injury. I'm sorry, at the paragraph at the top, number 1, the last sentence there under number 1, a student must be attending school full-time, that is attending full-time with a full academic load to participate in practices or games. So in other words, we wouldn't permit, even if a doctor were to say fine to a student, you're only back part-time, but you're good to go to play athletics. The feeling from Dr. Carlson, and you can speak to it more, was no, a student should be able to come in and be able to function full-time in all of their academic classes, as well as having been cleared to then play athletics in order to actually then participate. I don't know if you want to speak, I don't want to put you on the spot, but to speak about the importance of the policy and how you feel about it at this point.
Thank you so much for allowing me to come. So looking at the concussion policy, obviously the state thought it was important to have every district have a concussion policy in place for obvious reason. We're having a lot of children being injured in competitive sports, and we're seeing this nationwide. On average now there's about 68,000 concussions in high school athletes, and unfortunately several of them have resulted in deaths of high school athletes when they've been re-entered back into competitive sports too early, before their symptoms have resolved. The cause of that is usually massive swelling of the brain, because there's still injury and you get massive edema in the brain. So the state, and not just Connecticut, if you look across the country, most states have policies. I think Oregon is probably the leader in that movement in setting up really comprehensive policies on giving strict guidelines not only on prevention but education, and then kind of academic progression back into school, followed by progression into play. And I think that was the key element. When I looked at the previous policy, my concern was that there really wasn't any information about the academic side, because we all are here because we want our kids to learn, not necessarily play football or lacrosse or soccer, although I think that's an important part of many of the students' educational or high school experience or school experience. So there is a real big need to have some guidelines to be followed. Up to this point, without the guidelines, people were doing what they wanted to do in the schools, and medical instructions weren't always followed in the schools, and students were allowed back into play probably at risk in the recovery. So I do think that this is an important policy to come into play, not only for our athletes, although I think the state targeted specifically as an athletic policy, but I think this would apply to anybody who comes into our schools post-concussion. And we have to look at all students and make sure they're all safe and they enter back in. And one of the things you'll see in this policy is the concussion management team that was recommended by the state. And I know the State Board of Education, as well as the Superintendent's Board, recommended having a concussion management team, so including teachers, administrators, guidance counselors, and medical professionals kind of working together in the schools to make sure that the students are kind of re-entered back into the academic environment safely. And so I think that was a great addition to this policy. That was not in the past policy.
And speaking of that, I had sent the policy to both athletic directors, and I underscored some of the changes from the previous one that we had brought before the board, including the concussion management team, and both ADs endorsed it fully. Thought it was a really great idea to have that kind of a team in place. And so the fact that we had them on board is something that's really good. Obviously, the principals are on board with this. And the good news is that we would be working with Dr. Carlson in terms of like, okay, so what might that team look like? And does might the team differ depending upon, the circumstance, whether it's an athlete or it's a non-athlete, et cetera. But it's the idea that a student wouldn't fall through the cracks kind of coming back into the school. They would be classified as having a 504 plan, but somebody needs to be monitoring, and that's one of the roles of the concussion management team, is to ensure that kind of thing for a student.
Question?
Yes, Mr. DeRosa.
For you to either Dr. Carlson and Dr. Fieser, two doctors and three. When you say introducing them back into the school environment, that includes academics. So if a child has a concussion and is deemed at a school activity, whether it's within Milford or off-site, and then they're pulled from the activity, and then they're told to go see a doctor. And the doctor gives barrage of tests, and they're told to do whatever from a medical perspective, because from a parental point of view, that's who they're going to trust as their own doctor. And the doctor comes back and says, okay, the child's been out for 2 weeks because there's been no recurrence of headaches, there's been no need of squints, there's been no needs of any other kind of rehabilitation because of concussion, whether it's walking upstairs, shortness of breath, or whatever. And they come back with that kind of report. This policy engages that outside medical doctor when in the process.
Well, that would be kind of part of my role. If you look at the policy, it'll say that the medical advisor will interface with the primary care physician. And so if there's any question, my role would be to contact that physician and discuss the scenario of what's happening. So if there's something where we all know when a child comes back to my office and I'm re-examining them to clearance, you usually get most of the story. And if the child's been resting, they may not be symptomatic at that point. But if the school guidance counselors or the nurses are finding that when that child re-enters into the classroom, whether it's doing reading or other academics, or frankly the smart boards are difficult on some of the students, they become symptomatic again. And the pediatrician's not aware of that, and we're seeing that child not be able to attend school, a full day of school because of recurrence of symptoms, then I would encourage the school nurse to contact the pediatrician, or the school nurse to contact the parent, have the parent go back to the pediatrician. But if there's any concern about communication, that's part of my responsibility, would be to contact, get the information from the school, the guidance, the nurses, and then to contact the primary care physician. I mean, the primary care physician, you're right, should be the person you have the best relationship with and should be in the loop being managed. I'd want to be in the loop if it was my personal patient.
So ultimately, this could be that you can have a specialist in concussion therapy as a pediatrician that helps develop state policy and sign off on that child's ability to go back and be re-entered in the classroom through the cocoon therapy or whatever else. And then the school can come back and say, well, I saw them sitting in the classroom and they were squinting, or they seemed like they're a little dragging, whatever, and all of a sudden, you know, their ability to continue on in that teacher's mind, whatever, is like, oh my God, it's to be encouraged, because that's the first thing as a kid. And my only concern is, you know, having a child that went through an athletic experience and been concussion situations more time than I care to want to experience. You know, we've experienced that. And I was thankful that we had the relationship between the school, you know, her primary care specialist, her specialist, and the athletic director and the school nurse and so forth. My only concern is I don't want to see that the school becomes, you know, quote unquote, a final decision that the child can't move on and participate. And that's my only concern, you know, that when a decision's made and there's a disagreement, how does that, and I know there's no exact situation, but how does that disagreement get overcome?
I would anticipate it would be a conversation between whatever specialist or primary care provider and myself, or the nurse or the administrator. And we have to work together. Because ultimately the goal is to make sure the child's safe.
Absolutely. I'm not negating that. I'm not saying that.
I don't think it's necessarily, it should be a collaboration rather than, you know, an authoritative decision coming down. I mean, ultimately, I think the school's responsible for making sure the child's safe for school-related activities. So to make sure a child can keep up an academic load and be neurocognitively back to baseline is paramount before you let that child participate in activities which could re-injure.
Right.
So it would have to be a discussion. And I don't, the sense that I've gotten so far is that nobody wants to just say, that's it, the child can't participate. I mean, I think if there's something the school's seeing that the pediatrician or specialist may not know of, you have to let them know. And most specialists are going to say, well, I didn't know that. You know, let me call the family and talk to them. Let me have the family come back in, you know, and discuss the situation. So, I mean, it's hard to give specifics because every situation is different in experience.
There would also be training that would be done with staff. One of the good things is, and it's not included in here, the state, as part of the their guidelines, provided some very helpful information, you know, fact sheets for parents that, you know, we can give to them, because there's a whole education piece around for parents, and they have to sign off, you know, before their child were to play. Also, symptoms to look for that, for example, staff would be trained in, so that you would have a sense of, and they wouldn't just sort of, geez, I'm not really sure this kid just doesn't seem to be him or herself, that they would be really zeroing in on some particular symptoms that seem to be surfacing. And again, the thing that I feel so good about is that we have a school medical advisor whose focus in working with us is around, you know, the health of students, and we wouldn't. I mean, I would never presuppose to overrule a physician necessarily, unless it didn't meet our policy. For example, a student being able to carry a full load, etc. But the fact that I could turn to the medical advisor and the medical advisor could weigh in on that, you know, I think that we're in the best situation moving forward.
Pediatrics and pediatric subspecialties is a small community, and I know pretty much all of them. And it's easy enough to pick up the phone and call somebody and say, I'm concerned about this, this is what I'm seeing, and have that conversation.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes.
Yes, Mr. Whiskeyman?
I think I've mentioned this before, but part of my concern was not just the sports concussions, but concussions that might happen external to sports activity, automobile accident, whatever, and the non-athlete student coming back to participate in school activities, and whether or not physical education activities, which are part of the academic activities, would place a student in that condition at risk as much as, I mean, because, I mean, you don't normally have an extensive physical contact in physical education, but there is a risk, and I'm just concerned that this doesn't seem to include that as a special category or case of physical education as being considered as an athletic kind of activity versus an academic kind of activity. And I'm just wondering whether or not we should address that specific component. So if a student, say a non-athlete, came back after being treated for a concussion and now is entering into the school again, whether or not participation in the physical education component should also be curtailed until you're convinced that they no longer have any symptoms or signs of concussion as part of this policy. Because, it's the whole community, not just the athletes. And I understand the athletes are probably most at risk, but nonetheless, it's not all that uncommon for non-athletes to incur injury of some kind external to the school.
So my assumption is that when a student would come back into school, that we would receive medical information from his or her physician, indicating what the student is permitted to do and what the student is not permitted to do, down to the point of maybe no physical activity like physical education, et cetera. If there was a question, again, we would defer to Dr. Carlson, who in turn would be in touch with that physician. And the policy, you're right, it speaks only to athletics because that's the State Board of Education. The concussion policy is around athletic play. From our perspective, and certainly for the nurses are obligated to be responsive to students who are symptomatic of having a concussion or have had a concussion, and they come back in with that information.
Yeah, the reason I raise it is only because I'm thinking, if we're going to have this policy, should we include within that policy that segment of consideration, or does it need to be a separate policy, or is it actually covered under other policies?
I would say, what I would say to you is that when we talk about that there may be there may be an alteration to academics, physical education would be considered part of academics.
Right, and that's my concern. If you think of it as specifically an academic activity, but in fact there is a risk of the physical components of that, it's kind of a line of saying, well, do they participate or don't they, and under what circumstances, and we don't have the policy spelling that out. And that's the only reason I raise it.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%. I think the nice part about this policy with the management team is it gives guidance over children who are not involved in sports. And absolutely, they should be kept out of physical activity and physical education. And as a physician, when we write out the forms which give guidance to the schools, the number one thing is absolutely no physical activity, including physical education.
I just want to make sure that we have that covered, and that the policy allows us to provide that kind of mechanism to monitor and manage that approach.
So wouldn't something like that be covered the same way, for instance, if my child was in a car accident, out of school, and of course this all presupposes that the parents make the school aware of stuff that happens outside of school, but I would think that that all falls into that realm where a child is, if they're absent a certain number of days, it might kick in the need to have a doctor's note, in which case we're getting that information.
Right. We have students now who could get a concussion out on the playground at recess, for example, or kids who come in to school and giving us information that they have a concussion based upon something they were involved in outside of school.
Right.
We have an obligation to be responsive, and certainly the nurses have an obligation to be responsible for those students. I hear what you're saying about wanting to include something in the policy, and I even should share with Dr. Carlson that there was one point I thought, okay, how do we start to write this in? And then it just got too complex.
Okay.
Because it's written for athletics, and so then if we started to, well, this would apply to all. Well, what applies? Because it's speaking to athletes, and so we left the policy as is, since this is what's mandated by law. But the fact that we're having a concussion management team, that concussion management team would be addressing students regardless of whether they are an athlete.
And I would say part of the team should be the athletic director of the school, whether they play a sport or not, because they oversee a lot of the physical education.
Well, every child is a potential sports player. I mean, and I'm a proponent of encouraging every child to participate in a sport at least once in their career with us. And I think that's a good thing. Nonetheless, I was just trying to make sure that we have appropriate policy and coverage that enables us to take care of whatever situation arises. And that if we're covered under other policies, that's fine. I just want to make sure that you're confident that we have this covered.
I am
Okay.
confident.
Ms. Federico?
Through you, Madam Chair. A few questions. Could we, to Mr. Wiskeyman's point, could we notify all parents on the signs and symptoms of concussions just as a practice, so that they would know what to look for if there were, say, a child fell off their bike or something at home? It just seems like that might be a helpful thing to do, not something that has to be addressed in the policy, but something that just might be helpful to all parents.
So it's something we could talk about.
Okay. Next question. If a child has suffered a concussion outside of school, and that child also plays sports, would the district like to be notified that that concussion took place? Does that change how you would evaluate that student going forward?
Are you talking about a sport that's not a school sponsored?
Yeah. Let's say it happens a bike accident or something, and that student is also an athlete.
And I think as a pediatrician, because of the impact on learning, we would want you to inform the school anyway. The school may not have a part in the decision of whether that child goes back to play a non-school-sponsored sport.
Okay.
But I think the school should be notified right away.
Okay.
Simply because there need to be accommodations for that child's academic experience or exposure.
Okay. And once the school is notified, does the coach need to go? In other words, is there a higher concern about a repeat concussion after one has been suffered?
Certainly, with every concussion, there's always a higher chance of another. As long as the child is rehabilitated appropriately, you reduce the risk. Yes,
okay.
If you're still symptomatic and there's still deficit or injury in the brain, yeah, there's a real high risk for another injury.
Okay.
And that's, if you look at with the guidelines now in the private youth leagues, there's actually pretty strict guidelines on needing physician clearance and to replay or to come back in. And they have in the packet they talk about it, a return to play protocol. It's kind of, depending on which one to read, anywhere from 4 to 6 step protocol on how to re-enter a child into athletics or any activity, and watching at each step. It's increasing intensity and watching at each step to make sure there's not return of symptoms.
Okay.
And most of the youth coaches now I think it's also part of the other stable, have to be trained, do a mandatory training session and identifying, children with symptoms of concussion. They're all instructed now to remove children from play if there's any concern or question, and they all understand the return to play protocols.
Okay.
And part of that is medical clearance.
So if a child returns to school after a non-sport related concussion, but the child also plays a sport, within this policy, let's say so the nurse is notified as the child returns to school. Within this policy, are we sure that their coach in the sport that they're playing in will also be notified?
Can I clarify, are you talking a school sport or a non-school sport?
I'm talking about an incident that happens at a non-school sport. Okay, so falls off their bike on a Saturday, and returns to school, but they also play a sport.
A non-school sport?
A school sport.
School sport.
Sorry, they also play a school sport.
Okay.
Does that coach need to be notified, and do we have language or a process in place to ensure that they do?
We're already notified.
Well, I think we could notify them, but in truth, the student and the parent have to sign off before the student ever plays on any athletic team, indicating that they have, first of all, read information tied to what concussion is involved, etc. And their obligation to inform us if there are symptoms that start to emerge with their child, et cetera. So part of this is, there's a notification maybe from the nurse, but the other side of it is there's an obligation on the part of the parent and the student to come forward.
I think the answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
Because I think with the management team, part of that team is going to be the athletic directors and the coaches. So if a student gets an out-of-school injury, concussion, whether it's an athletic event or a car accident, and the school's notified that the child's suffering from a concussion, part of that management team, if they're involved in a sport, a school-sponsored sport, would be to notify that coach.
Okay.
And have that coach as part of it, or the athletic trainer. If you're talking about the high school level, the athletic trainers who are there are part of that and are notified immediately. And it works both ways. Currently, the athletic trainers notify the nurses of injuries sustained during play.
Okay, all right, thank you. That was my
Yeah,
question.
I was trying to understand where we're talking at youth levels, where there are no school-sponsored sports. That would be different.
Okay. And the, on page 2 of 3, under the P5141.7, in the third paragraph, there's 3 different options for parents. Either read written materials, view online training videos, or attend in-person training regarding the district's concussion education plan. Would that vary by sport? Or I'm just wondering why we have the 3 options?
Because that's the state language.
Okay.
That's the state language.
Okay, so then that would be left up to the district to
We will make the
determine?
decision as to what it is that we will have parents engage in, which I suspect is both a written piece as well as something that they will be watching online more and more. There's information, the videos that come forward that, that sort of speak to the whole issue of concussion, et cetera. And then that's where there's the parent and student sign-off form that's been created by the State Board of Education, which is very similar to what we do right now, but there's some tweaking to it since they put these guidelines together, and that's the form then that will be used beginning July.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Sadi?
Thank you. Madam Chair, through you to the administration. Going back to that page 2 or 3, which is page 13, the first full paragraph starts off, the board recognized commencing July 1st, 2015. We see that. And we get down to the portion where it says, prior to participating in any intramural or interscholastic athletic activity, students must, and if you could just explain why in this following paragraph it says that the parents prior to the school year beginning July 1st, 2015 thereafter have to do something, where it doesn't appear that the same applies to the student athlete. Cindy, you want to have the same consistent?
You kind of lost me.
Okay.
The second paragraph talks about participating beginning in July 1 and thereafter. A parent guardian must read the written materials, and then the next paragraph, the district will utilize the consent form.
No, it says prior to participating in the instrument. It says intramural activity for the school year beginning July 1st, 2015 and thereafter. That line is not found in what the student's responsibility is. I think it should be in there. It was prior to everybody starting. Parents have to do the same thing the student does.
Right.
It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say it in the second paragraph. It doesn't say they have to do it prior to July, or any school year thereafter. The language is not, it should be similar, I would think.
It says the parent or guardian of each athlete must read written materials, view online training, or attend an in-person training regarding the district's concussion education plan.
Right, but the language I'm concerned about is prior to participating in athletics, intramural interscholastic activity for the school year beginning July 1st, 2015 is not contained in the paragraph prior to.
So it's just a matter of adding that.
So we can add that. What I can say to you is that the parent, this is a student and parent concussion education plan and consent form. So both have to sign off on this. And then there's a whole piece in here on what a concussion is, what the signs of a concussion is, and then what the concussion management requirements are, et cetera. I mean, it's quite a lengthy form here, medical clearance that's required, et cetera. And then what is this? I have read and understood this document, the student parent concussion education plan and consent form, et cetera, student name, parent name. So both have to sign off that they have read this and that, they understand the whole piece.
Is that in our
You're
packet?
wanting it in, pardon me?
Is that in our packet?
The form, we don't generally put forms in here, but it's required that they have to sign off on it. That's a requirement.
I have an additional question specifically about that. We have broken down what the athletic director's responsibility is, what the coach's responsibility is. Who's going to be given responsibility keeping track of these forms? To make sure that...
The athletic directors will be. And also, I mean, the nurses would have the medical documentation from any physician. But in as far as concussions tied to athletics, that's the responsibility of the athletic director in concert with the trainer, the athletic trainer in each of the schools.
I'm assuming that you follow, I don't know your exact policy, but I'm assuming that no athlete is allowed to play until they have a physical per year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's every September, the September sports go crazy because the students have not gotten their physical and they can't play.
Right.
Same thing here, that they're going to have to do it, and if they don't have the form completed, it's going to be the athletic director's responsibility,
That's correct.
not the coaches.
Well, I mean, it is the coaches, but it's the athletic director's responsibility to make sure that the coaches have turned everything in. You know, what I can't say to you, and I'm sorry the athletic directors were not able to be here this evening, but they are so conscious of this policy because the policy actually went into, most of this policy went into place more than a year ago. We're under it as we speak. And there's reporting that has to be made to the state now on an annual basis, so there's very detailed record keeping that has to be kept. This will also apply to intramurals at the middle school. And we will, there's a line in here that talks about Wendy Kapazna as our HR person ensuring that those staff members that are running intramurals have been trained in concussions and symptoms of concussions, et cetera, and what to do if something were to occur, et cetera. So we may not have every single line in a policy, but what I can say to you is that the plan is already in place. It has been in place. We need to tweak it. We need to now formalize the concussion management team. But in as far as monitoring concussions, there's also new regulations for hours of play that a student can, and days of play, particularly in football, when they're mandated to rest. And there's the tracking of that. The ADs are already aware of that and those new regulations.
I have one last question through you to either the doctor or administration. I understand that this is very well written. I understand that it put a lot of work into it. But I would like to have somebody explain to me where the legal authority is to have a parent tell, I have a soccer player, and they're playing in a league that's not sanctioned by the school authorities, and they get injured, where they're required to report that to anybody in the public school system. Is that in place right now?
Would they be required?
By legal authority?
No. They're protected under HIPAA, aren't they?
That's...
Under HIPAA laws, if they don't wish to report it, they don't have to.
And you're going to have parents that do that.
Thank you.
They have the right. I mean, it's
Depending on the sport and the quality of the student, state championships, all the good kind of stuff. Well, we'll just say.
It's no different than any other
Right.
class. And having coached enough sports, I've seen parents.
And if I'm not mistaken, if I could make a comment, Ms.
Yes,
Glenn.
Mr. Rosa.
That when school starts, there's information sessions for sports that are held in the fall, winter, and spring. If I'm not mistaken, that's when all the forms are given out, and all the coach tells you what it is, all the documents you have to receive, other than the student participation form, which has to be done before you come to school, the health record, which has to be done before you come to school. So these are the forms that are given. The coach knows what, I mean, they're giving their potential, players those forms they need to participate in their sport. So I would expect that all we're doing here is adding this as another thing to look out for and inform the children, because you're going to require the parent signature that my student recognizes it, and I as a parent recognize it in order to participate.
Which again, is already in place this year.
Right.
And we're using, we're using the current CIAC, Connecticut
And they've changed their whole
Interscholastic.
rule.
And, so we've already been using that, and this new form is almost the mirror of CIAC. So I think they built off of the CIAC form and added some pieces to it. Because I know when the athletic director saw it, they immediately said, this is very similar to the form we're currently using.
And they're modeling after the NCAA.
Yes.
The high schools are late to the game, just because the professionals in the college have done this years ago. NCAA had the forms in 2011.
Right.
Nothing new.
Other questions on this? Seeing none, thank you very much. So this is the first reading, so it will come back onto the agenda for June, at the June meeting, or if you want to delay it to July, it's supposed to be approved by July 1st, but if we did it the first meeting of July, that's the board's call. But we were going to put it on the June 8th. I don't see any reason why it can't be on the June 8th meeting. You'll look at that consistency piece that Mr. Sadie was asking about.
Yes, I'm wondering if you looked on page 17, at the top of page 17 of the regulations, it said a student athlete who has been, on the top of page, actually 16. On a yearly basis, a concussion consent and information sheet shall be signed and returned by the student athlete and the athlete's parent and guardian. If we might want to add that to the policy, which I think might then address the question that you raised, Mr. Sadie. Because it says the student, so page 16 at the top, or page 2 or 4,
Right,
administrative regulations.
That's found in the regulation.
Right.
I just thought there was an inconsistency in the two paragraphs in the
policy. And the only thing I could say to you is 99% of the policy was taken right off of the CAVE policy, which was taken off of what the State Board of Education. We didn't, but the only thing we modified is that it said that the athletic director was responsible for intramurals. Our athletic directors are only responsible for high school athletics. So we added a statement in here about the HR director making sure that the intramural coaches were received the proper training in concussion management.
Do you have some wording in, if you have some wording in mind, maybe you could forward it along to Dr. Visa to make it easier? Model it.
Can this be sent to us by a PDF? That's, I don't know.
You have it in the, Mrs. Griffin can send that. Okay, all right, so moving on.
So I wanted to update the board as to where we are with filling the position of assistant superintendent, and Mr. Cummings is going to leave during this part of the conversation. You all know that he is leaving, and so what I wanted to do was to simply bring you up to speed where we are. So I want you to know that we have we posted the position. We actually posted the position at this point. I believe it was 2.5 weeks ago. I believe it was that we posted it. We also, and I can give you copies, we sent out an invitation. This was created by Kathy Benetti. An invitation was mailed to every single superintendent in the state of Connecticut inviting people to apply for the position. This is common in school systems. I receive invitations all the time, and I pass them on to individuals in the schools that I think might be, have the qualifications for this. So we've done that. The posting is going to close on July 7th, at which point then we will actually do screening, paper screening of candidates, and select a pool of candidates to begin the initial hiring process. So I wanted to also, we took a look at the job description because it hadn't been revised in 7 or 8 years, I believe it was. So we revised the job description, which I'll give you a copy of that as well.
Right.
Did you say July 7th?
I'm sorry, June. Sorry, I keep
7th.
getting my months confused. June 7th is the closing. And again, that's the point at which we would then really start to do the paper screening. So what we tried to do in the job description is to really articulate in more detail on the specifics, particularly the tasks of the job itself, and then, really flesh out what the skills and abilities, the knowledge base that people should have who would be applying. On the last page, there's a piece on work environment, which has become more common now in job descriptions, so that it's made clear to people coming in the expectation that they can operate machines that would be normally expected of somebody in this role, that they can drive, et cetera, and that they understand what the physical or mental demands or work hazards might be. That's now pretty standard in job descriptions. And then what we're looking for as far as qualifications is that someone would have a bachelor's and master's degree and would have their 6th year degree, generally, which is most people would take to get their 092 certification. So from an accredited college or university. We are not requiring a doctorate, but we did say that it would be preferred. And then obviously extensive teaching experience and administrative experience. We're confident that we're going to have a strong pool. I'm saying that not having looked at the applications, I really have not looked at all yet. But I think, I know that Milford is in a very good position right now to be attractive to candidates. I can tell you that I've had a number of my colleagues already say to me they know of people that are applying for the position. I had a call today from a colleague who said, can you just tell me, is it a wide open position? I said, absolutely, it's a wide open position. So I think we're going to get a good pool. I can tell you that if we don't get a good pool, I won't settle. This is a pivotal position, as you know, as board members, and we want to get someone, the best person for the job.
We open to ask questions.
Are you done with that, your presentation?
I just have one.
Yes,
the
Mr.
reason why I was
President.
asking because it has to do with what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an idea so far how many applications you've received or resumes?
I haven't looked, to be honest with you, and the only reason why I haven't looked is that, we're about halfway through, and we have another 2+ weeks, and there's been some other things that have been first and foremost on my plate, again, just even in terms of the staffing last week, in terms of the buildings and stuff, so I have not looked. Yeah. And the other thing that I would say to you, do you know?
I was just gonna say there are 14 people that have applied so far.
14?
But in the posting closes on June 7th. But what is pretty typical, especially with administrative positions, is people wait till the last couple of days to apply for whatever reason. Maybe they don't want their bosses to know, or they're still trying to contemplate whether they want to make a move. So I know that number 14 will probably double and then some.
I don't know if you can say, but no, I don't think it'd be fair to ask. I'll forego the question. Never mind.
Questions? Just one thing that I wanted to make sure the board understood was that, we do have as part of our board policy an emergency superintendent succession policy that says that the assistant superintendent or the deputy superintendent, which is Mr. Riccitelli, and we do need to update this policy to correct that job title because you have a different job title now. that they assume the superintendent responsibilities on an emergency basis should an unexpected need arise. I mean, certainly the assistant superintendent covers things if Dr. Fieser is away for, you know, meetings, out of the office for any reason, you know, vacation, whatever. But in the matter of an emergency, you know, they assume the role, but they do not. I don't want the board to think that the assistant superintendent automatically inherits the role. If there were the need to have a prolonged, you know, replacement for Dr. Fieser, the board at the time would have to take action to name an interim superintendent. So I just want to make sure the board understands that they don't actually automatically inherit the role.
How quickly does that happen?
Well, there is it doesn't say how quickly it happens, but it, you know, I think that, I mean, it would behoove any board to do it rather, I mean, to make a decision as to what they want to do in terms of how they might go about with a replacement. But it is the board's responsibility to name an interim. So it's not like the person just inherits the role and becomes the superintendent. That's not the way it works. Yes, Ms. Federico.
I would just like to offer a comment because the write-up that we have on this item says we're going to have a discussion about board members thinking on the attributes, skills, and knowledge they desire in a person being considered for this position. To your point, Sue, we have a phrase that sometimes gets used when we're hiring new positions in my office, and the phrase is, if Jen gets run over by the beer truck, you know, who's going to be able to step in? You know, and it's certainly, I prefer to say, if Jen wins the Mega Millions jackpot, who's going to step in? But I think it's always something to think about and to take into consideration when hiring. You know, like as Ms. Glennon said, we have a plan for emergency, and I understand it would not be, you know, an automatic promotion to the position, but I think we should be thinking about what characteristics, you know, we would like to see in terms of succession planning. So. Yeah. I would urge you to find the next Dr. Fieser.
Well, thank you for that compliment. That's good, but that may not be the best, because we want to have someone who's going to challenge me in my thinking and sometimes disagree, etc. But I hear it. You know, thank you. You know what I did. I mean, I do want to engage the board a little bit in some discussion, or at least to offer some thoughts, and then if the board would prefer to do this one-on-one where they're emailing, you know, that's okay too, and then I can sort of share that out. But I didn't know if there were other questions tied to just, you know, where we are in the process itself. You know, the most critical thing is that we have a strong pool of candidates. I mean, when all is said and done, we need one. We need one person who's going to be really good for this position. But you know, but we really would like to have a strong pool.
I do have one question.
Yes, Mr. DeRosa.
I'm going to go back and ask a question I said I wasn't going to ask. Do we have anybody from the inside that's dipped their foot in the
I don't recall.
And
actually, to be honest with you, if we did, it wouldn't really be appropriate for us to say.
And that's why I didn't ask it, but
yeah.
it was just gnawing at me, so I'd rather just ask it and do it. Or maybe over to Fish or not. I thought I'd get that answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
I do have one other technical question. The way you've lined out the job responsibilities, are these exactly Mr. Cummings' job responsibilities, or did anything change? Because I know sometimes when someone's been in a position a long time, they get extra stuff. And when you bring in someone new, they don't always take on all of the extras.
So there is more in this job description than was in the previous job description.
Okay.
And that's my tendency is to want to try and articulate as many of the major responsibilities of the role of the person coming in, you know, might know that. So for the sake of conversation, leads the district improvement team in the development of a district continuous improvement plan. I'm not sure there was a district improvement team in place eight years ago. I think that was 8 or 7 or 8 years ago when Mr. Cummings assumed this role. You know, I mean, for example, you know, I think that And then there's other ones here, works with the building principals on the development of their school continuous improvement plans. I don't know if they existed, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, but now every school develops a continuous improvement plan each year that's reviewed by myself and Mr. Cummings, and it's used. It's a live document that teachers then use to write their goals for part of teacher evaluation, et cetera. You know, there are some specific, I mean, the idea of supervising and evaluating district instructional supervisors, some building principals, we didn't have instructional supervisors 7 or 8 years ago. Supervisors, the art, music, and instructional technology departments, maybe instructional department and technology was under, I'm not really sure, art music was not under this position. Teacher evaluation plans and the goal of strengthening competencies, teacher and administrator. Well, teacher and administrator evaluation has taken on a whole different dimension in this person's role than would have than certainly existed 7 or 8 years ago. So I mean, I could go through more, but my point is that what we did was we looked at what existed and then looked at, okay, what else is not in here, and tried to reflect that as best as possible in here. It's a job description. It doesn't have every single piece in it. And the verb, sometimes he or she is directly responsible, and sometimes the person may oversee, so there's someone underneath them that really is taking responsibility, but this person is overseeing it.
Okay, but for the most part, it's essentially the same responsibilities that Mr. Cummings has today.
Correct.
Okay.
That's, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mr. Wiskeyman?
Continuing along that line, I would look forward to, after the close and you've started to consider various candidates, you're going to find some who might be strong in some areas and weaker in other areas. It's a matter of degree. I mean,
absolutely.
You know, you certainly aren't going to want to take on someone who is so weak in an area that they're not going to rise up to the level of consideration. Mm-hmm. But there'll be hopefully several candidates who will be prospects that you could consider, and so I look forward to your continuing thoughts on whether or not all of these responsibilities should stay in that position, or whether or not there's an opportunity to consider some possible restructuring of your administrative staff and organization within the context of hiring a new person who would probably need their own professional development path to gain those areas where they may not be quite as strong as you would like them to be in a particular area. Because no one's going to walk in and, you know, just nail everything and just be 100%. It's just not the way we humans work. So,
and we've done a little bit of that. So one of the pieces that was in here that is not in here is that the new director of special education will report to me, whereas Mrs. Keller has reported to Mr. Cummings or the assistant superintendent, maybe ever since you were named director. I'm not sure.
Yes.
But in my own mind, two new people coming in, it made more sense to pull special education under me, take it out from underneath the assistant superintendent, particularly with a new assistant superintendent coming in. So that's one major decision that we've already made around this. And then the other thing that we're looking at is we're looking at some of the job responsibilities of the people who report to the assistant superintendent to say, are there some job responsibilities that really should be being done by others, which would mean then, again, in terms of that oversight, there may be fewer things that.
Okay. And in that line, when the dust settles a little bit and hopefully we have the people on staff, I'd like to see an updated org chart that specifies how everything is laying out and their appropriate areas of responsibility, because it seems to me that would be something that would help us understand the operations and the structure and our next steps going forward.
That's a good point.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, one of the, speaking of attributes, skill set, and maybe priorities, to perhaps prompt some of your thinking, I'm just going to share 3 questions that have to do with those 3 areas with some suggestions, not in priority, not ranked or anything, but just again to get you to start to think about it. Because one of the things that I think is most important, I mean, whenever we're hiring somebody, the first thing that we want to get a sense of what are those attributes that we're looking for in a person, and then what's the skill set that we think that should really be a part of the person. And then because you for example, at a Board of Ed, there's a number of priorities. You have priorities. There's obviously priorities tied to the position. What what would you what might you think is most important with respect to the person coming in, assuming the role? So, for example, under attributes, again, there could be many more. And this is just a list, again, not ranked, not in any order of any kind. Sometimes what we might do is we could say, okay, of this list, I don't believe in ranking because I think it's something like this because I just don't think it necessarily makes sense. But what I do think it makes sense is to be able to say, for example, to you, okay, if you had to individually choose what are the top 5 of the attributes here, what would be the things that you would circle? And so my question to you is, we could go through this and then kind of share out and get a sense of where you are, or I could say to you, here's what I would like you to do. Choose the top 5, in the next list, you could choose the top 5 in terms of skill set, and then in terms of priorities, I don't know necessarily I'd have you choose the top 5, but maybe I would say choose 3. And then if you wanted to then send them to me and I could then show you, okay, where are you? It's really up to you, and Mrs. Glennon, I don't know what you're
What do you think, board members? Do you want to,
I said we mail it in.
Mr. DeRosa has suggested we take this home and email Dr. Fieser
Come on, where are you? Come on, let's go.
John. We'll have time to think about it.
You'd like time?
Yeah, I think
You'd all like
it'd be
time to
easier
think
read.
about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of the
A lot of
above.
good stuff in. Seriously.
So are you comfortable if we were to say that, for number 1 to choose 5 attributes out of this list? Not, you don't have to rank them, but what would be the 5 that you think are the most essential? Number 2, in terms of skill set, again, if you wanted to choose 5, remember in the ones that you don't choose, it doesn't mean to say that they drop off the table. It's just we're forcing you to say, okay, what do you think is most essential? And then, again, with number 3, I would suggest that you choose 3. You notice that in each one of, number 2, we forgot to put the word other. If there's something that's not there, you can always add that. So what we could do is create, we could actually create put this real quickly on a spreadsheet, send it to you, and then you could just, and Pam, you could send it back to Pam.
Does that work?
That'd be good.
Okay, so send it to Pam. What would be a good timeline, Dr. Fieser? Friday or Monday? Friday or Monday?
Well, today's, today's.
Monday, let's
relax
I would
here.
say
So,
Monday.
I don't know, how Monday?
Yeah, and we'll give you
Over the weekend?
We'll give you a reminder on.
Okay, so by Monday the 1st.
Give a reminder on Friday's update.
We'll do that, assuming all of you read your Friday updates. I know it's right at the top of your list on that Friday. Waiting
You
with
read that
bated
for us
breath.
We know that you have to wait until Monday to read them.
Depends what time we work Friday.
Oh, okay.
Been working late.
The other thing that I would say to you is if there is also, if there's another question that you would like to hear from one another as a board, you could send that question in and we could add that as well. Again, this is generally kind of the major categories, whether you're looking for a superintendent or you're looking for an assistant superintendent, you're looking for a principal. You're talking about leadership, and what are you looking for?
I understand that. I'm sure we're all aware of a cautionary note on the emails, because...
Well, we're just sending it to one person, so there's no problem.
I understand, but don't reply all.
Right, there's no need to reply all, correct. So Pam will send us a spreadsheet that we can, I mean, do we need a spreadsheet, or can we just, what would be easier?
You could do this, if you want to,
just email.
Question one, question two. I mean, if it's easier for people to just email and just, I can send this to you. You want to highlight it? You can highlight it. You want it, whatever you want.
Do we need another document other than what we have, or? I need to.
We can respond with just the letters.
I can just send an email, number 1, A, B, C, D, E, number 2, is that okay? Is that okay?
Can we have discussion on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Rose, what would you rather do?
What do you want us to do? Is it easiest for you to?
Whatever's easiest for you.
Let's put the number 1 in the letters. 1 and 5 letters. 2 and 5 letters, 3 and 3 letters.
In an email.
I'm going to send you instructions tomorrow.
You should have a red arrow.
So then you can respond to her, yes.
And we'll respond to Pam.
Right.
So this is our homework.
Yes, this is our homework. All right. Any other questions on this before we move on to public comment? Are we good? Everybody good? Okay. Public comment. Speakers may offer objective comments about school operations and programs. The board encourages speakers not to express personal complaints or defamatory comments about Milford Board of Education personnel or any person associated with Milford Public School System. Security issues and matters relating to negotiations and grievances will not be permitted, consistent with the principles of the Federal Education Right to Privacy Act. Discussion of students is prohibited absent parental waiver. Speakers are asked to limit their comments to 3 minutes, and please note public comment is limited to agenda items only at committee of the whole meetings, which this is, and we are being televised. Yes, Mrs. Burney.
Kathy Burney, 96 Centennial Drive. Thank you guys for approving the budget with some nice improvements there. I think the media aid specialists are very important. These kids are being tested on computers from grade 3 on. I think it's important to get them on the computers and get them how to do it right from the get-go. So I think you can build on having these full-time people. When it comes to this assistant superintendent, add common sense on there, okay? And passion. They gotta have the passion. I know we can't clone Mike. God knows I would have done it. But passion. He had the passion not only for the school system and the education, but he had it for the community as well. That's going to be a tough thing to get, but it's really, really important. That's it.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yes, Mrs. Huber. I'm sorry, Ms. Kennedy.
I'm Kathleen Kennedy, 277 Roses Mill Road. I just didn't expect you to be here tonight, but just a comment on the concussion bill. It's gone through, I'm sure you know, many drafts of the state legislature, and testimony went on for hours and hours into the wee hours of the morning. I am also serve as a co-president of the Foreign Sports Booster Club, so I can only really speak to foreign. And Mrs. Federico and Mr. Sadi, you had addressed some questions. As one of the things I do as president is I meet with the athletic director on a regular basis. And we also look to see what programs we can bring into the parents. And we are very fortunate to have Dr. Carlson. Dr. Carlson has been a speaker. We've had our athletic director come and speak to our parents, and we try to do that as often as possible. We did do a concussion program 2 years ago. Last year we had a professional come in and speak on overcoming injuries, both physically and mentally. We had several football players that were injured, and it impacted their football playing career, and they were having some difficulties actually dealing with it. So through, I think I asked Dr. Carlson for some guidance, but through Dr. Carlson and Amy Cavallera, our she called it, I told her first. Our trainer. She got us in touch with someone who came out, and it was extremely beneficial to both the parents, and a lot of students came out because, you know, when you're dealing with an injury, it then can impact your schoolwork as well, especially if, you know, you can no longer play the sport that you love. So I just wanted to let you know that as part of the Foreign Sports Booster Club, we do a lot of that. We try to get all kinds of programs out. We're looking to do a Heart Safe one next year for the upcoming fall week, and I'm sure we'll do a concussion one with all the changes, because Dr. Carlson had alluded to playing time with football, which is going to be really confusing to parents, because Mr. Vitelli had to explain it several times at our last meeting. It's a little bit confusing, so he's going to address all of the parents and meet with all of them. Personally, I hope to see that playing time go into even soccer and lacrosse, some other sports that you know, there's resulting in head injuries. So I just wanted to say that we're staying on top of this as well, and other programs that we can bring to parents. And any way we can ever assist you guys, we would certainly work with some kind of.
Appreciate that.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Trevor.
Any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I just want to bring a board comment.
Oh, you know what, we don't, that was a mistake, that was on there, we don't have board comment at the committee of the whole meeting, so we can save it for next June.
I don't have mine.
All in favor of adjournment?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Our non-meeting will stay here? How long? Okay. Yeah. You can stay right here.